The difference between a food chain and a food web. Almost all the organisms ultimately get their energy from the sun. Definitely, the decomposers are getting energy from tertiary consumers from secondary consumers from primary consumers from that of sun. So ultimately, all organisms are getting energy from where? From the sun. Web. We will compare the food chain with a food web. A series or the linear arrangement of organism eating and being eaten is called as food chain. You can see that there is a series: grass eaten up by grasshopper, grasshopper eaten up by snake, snake by hawk, and hawk by fungus, right? This is a straight line series, right? No one is coming back to eat another. Snake is not coming back to eat grass as well along with grasshopper, or grasshopper is not going to eat snake and grass together. So the food chain represents the series of transfer of energy in different levels of community in a straight line, while that of a food web is a collection of food chains interconnected from the same ecosystem. It means many of the food chains are interconnected to each other, right? If we'll go through, through a food chain, there are multiple consumers and multiple producers. It means a consumer is multiple in feeding. It's not depending exclusively on a single kind of organisms as its feed. ठीक है, यानी कि एक कंज्यूमर एक किस्म की फूड नहीं खाता, वो एक साथ बहुत सारी चीज़ें खाता है. लाइक आपने अगर कभी देखा हो पैरट, आपने कभी देखा हो, प्राइमरली ये फ्रूट ईटर है. ठीक है, इसकी जो फूड है वो फ्रूट्स हैं, फ्रूगीवोरस है, बट एडिशनली इट कैन ईट नट्स एज वेल, राइट. तो अब इसकी फूड क्या हो गई? दो हो गई. ठीक है, इसी तरीके से आपने अक्सर देखा होगा स्नेक, या नहीं भी देखा तो स्नेक्स जो हैं वो मोस्टली कार्निवोरस हैं, दूसरे छोटे छोटे एनिमल्स को खाते हैं, बट इट ईट्स एग्स एज वेल. तो अगर वो फ्रॉग को खाता है, वो छोटी लिजर्ड्स को खा जाता है, या वो चिक्स को खा जाता है, तो उसकी तो खुराक 3 किस्म की हो गई है, 3 किस्म की फूड हो गई है उसकी. सो उसने डाइवर्सिटी क्रिएट की हुई है अपनी फूड में. ठीक है, तो वो 3 फूड चेन्स, जहाँ फ्रॉग जिस चेन में पड़ा है वहाँ भी स्नेक एज अ सेकेंडरी कंज्यूमर ऐड हो जाएगा, जिस फूड चेन में लिजर्ड पड़ी हुई है वहाँ भी ऐड हो जाएगा, जिस फूड चेन में फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल रैट पड़ा हुआ है वहाँ भी ऐड हो जाएगा. तो इंटरकनेक्शन हो जाएगी यहाँ पे. अब ये आप डायग्राम देखें कि फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल ग्रास इज़ ईटन अप by rabbit, you can see over here, by this one rabbit, by deer, by grasshopper, and this bird is further eaten up by this hawk, right? This tree is eaten up by this grasshopper, and grasshoppers are eaten up by what? By this bird. This tree is eaten up by this squirrel, and squirrel is eaten up by this hawk, right? This grass is eaten up by this deer, deer is eaten up by this wolf, and the wolf is tertiary consumer itself, right? And all of them are eaten up by what? By fungus for decomposition, and so on. Is it? So this is a food web. There is a web-like structure, and there are many primary consumers, there are many secondary consumers, and there are many tertiary consumers, and all of them are interconnected to each other. There is another example of food web. A food web is a group of connected chains. When an animal from one chain is eaten by an animal from another food chain, those animals are part of a food web, right? For example, this sunlight is trapped by what? This is trapped by these trees, right? They are the producers, right? These trees are eaten up by rabbits, by mouse, and by goat. So there are 3 primary consumers. These rabbits are eaten up by jackals, by wild cats, you can see, and by owls as well, while this mouse is eaten up by this owl, this wild cat, and this wildcat is further eaten up by lion. This lion is not in only tertiary consumer over here, so 1 2 3 and 4, so it is tertiary consumer here. But for this one food chain, the plant matter is eaten up by a goat. This is a primary consumer, there is no secondary consumer. Goat is directly eaten up by the lion, so over here it is what? It is a secondary consumer. Same is the case with the third food chain, in which the mouse is eaten up by the snake and snake is eaten up by the hawk. So there are different consumers that themselves are sometimes primary or secondary or tertiary consumers, and they are eaten up by the organisms of another food chain, that is called as food web. Here comes an example of aquatic food web, that in the water how the things are interconnected to each other. Here comes an example of aquatic food web. It means how in the water the things are interconnected to each other. They're connected to and affected by terrestrial food webs, right? For example, the human or the birds. It means the food chains or the food webs in the aquatic body are usually affected by the terrestrial organisms. यानी कि जो tertiary consumers होते हैं वो टेरेस्ट्रियल इन्वायरमेंट से भी आ सकते हैं, ठीक है। आपस में तो एक दूसरे को खा ही रहे हैं, उनको खाने के लिए बाहर से भी कोई आ सकता है। फॉर एग्जांपल अगर ये आप फूड चेन देखें, ये जो बाहर बनी हुई है, सनलाइट इज़ ट्रैप्ड बाय अ प्लांट मैटर, दिस इज़ सनलाइट ट्रैप्ड बाय अ प्लांट मैटर एंड दिस प्लांट मैटर इज़ ईटन अप बाय स्नेल्स। सिपियाँ जो होती हैं उन सिपियों को स्मॉल फिशेस खा जाती हैं। सो दिस इज़ द प्राइमरी कंज्यूमर, दिस इज़ सेकेंडरी कंज्यूमर एंड दिस इज़ द टर्शियरी कंज्यूमर, isn't? लेकिन समटाइम्स उस टर्शरी कंज्यूमर को भी ह्यूमन ट्रैप करके ले जाता है या बर्ड्स ले जाते हैं। सो हेयर आर टू टर्शरी कंज्यूमर्स, ठीक है। सो ये जो बर्ड या फिर ह्यूमन, दिस इज़ नॉट पार्ट ऑफ दिस फूड चेन, they are coming from another food chain that is outside the water, so they are affected by terrestrial organisms as well.